You're listening to the Raw Honeys podcast, the place to be real, be love, and befriend. Join Chelsea Fine, Heather Hildenbrand, and me, Amanda Axel. We're real friends who aren't afraid to talk about the raw truth of real life. If you're looking for a group of girlfriends who will support and encourage you when the going gets tough, this is the place to be. Pull up a chair, grab a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, and enjoy the show. Hey, honeys. Welcome. This is Heather Hildenbrand, and I am here with Chelsea Fine and Amanda Axel, and we are here to talk to you today about guilty pleasures. And I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be a really fun conversation. But really what we want to do first is just get you thinking, what does that term make you think of when you hear it? Guilty pleasure. Does it bring something to mind? Maybe something that you do enjoy that you don't want anybody to know about? Because I think that's maybe the typical definition of the word. Or does it make you think of something else, something totally different? I will be the first to admit that guilty pleasure just makes me think of something sexy right off the cuff. I don't know. And we want to talk about that today because we've had some kind of past conversations around this and how, okay, let me just rant on my soapbox for a minute. Why does the word guilty pleasure make me think of something sexy? Or why does it make me think of something secretive? Or why does it bring to mind the images or the thoughts or the ideas that it does? And so I'm curious what you guys all think. I'm curious what Amanda and Chelsea think. And I will tell you that for me, when I started really dialing into this and thinking about why do I think this way? Why does it remind me of these things? I think it's because it has the word guilt in it, which is a trigger word for me. I'm not going to lie. And so we're probably going to end up going down this rabbit hole of what I think about the word guilt, which probably has nothing to do with what you think of when you hear the words guilty pleasures. But for me, I get a little ranty. I get a little rebellious when anybody tells me that any way that I think, feel, or participate in my life, that I should feel guilty about it. I hate the emotion of guilt. I just think that it's not productive. It's destructive. And I don't like when anybody tells me or someone else that I have to feel guilty or bad about something. It just feels really unhealthy to me. So I don't love that this phrase guilty pleasure has the word guilt in it. I don't love that it's designed to maybe suggest that in a flirty, fun way, we're supposed to feel bad about whatever this thing is. I don't like that. And so I wanted to talk about it and get other people's opinions and see if maybe I'm the only one that gets a little bit, twitchy-eyed or triggered. You have this word.
Twitchy-eyed.
I get twitchy-eyed about it. I want to fight. I want to fight somebody about it.
I know you do.
Fight. Anytime anybody tells me how to feel, especially if it's a negative thing, I'm like, let's fight about it. It's not okay. And I don't know who I'm fighting for because I don't feel bad. I don't feel guilty. I'm fighting for all the people maybe who do. I don't know. But so for me, when I hear guilty pleasure, quote unquote, guilty pleasure, I do think of like maybe something sexy or sex related, or I think of something that we don't want other people to know that we enjoy, whatever that is. But I'm curious, maybe everybody has kind of a different sense of it. So Chelsea, when you hear somebody say guilty pleasure, what do you think? And what feeling do you associate with it? Is it like a fun, flirty, light kind of haha guilty pleasure? Or is it really bad? Like you really would have shame or wouldn't want somebody to know?
That's a good question. I know the answer immediately. With guilty pleasure, immediately I think forbidden. Those two things are sort of the same, or forbidden in some aspect at least. And so I don't know if I carry that same fight that you're describing for not liking it, because I think what I've done with that phrase is I've reworked it. I've reworked my perspective on it. And this is kind of what I do with a lot of things in my life, to try and own it myself, to try and define it or shape it myself for something that doesn't piss me off all the time. So for instance, guilty pleasure immediately evokes like this imagery of like something forbidden, but cast in firelight, sort of in shadows, but smiling. Does that, do you know what I mean? Like it's forbidden and maybe dangerous, but it's not bad, you know? And so for me, guilty pleasure is, well, I think is nothing because yeah, it doesn't actually evoke a lot of strong emotions in me. But it would if I was like speaking about it or hearing other women speak about it in a negative sense, like what you're talking about, because that's like such a great point to draw attention to, is that just by attaching the word guilty next to the word pleasure, like those two things are supposed to be like opposites. No, they're not supposed to be. They are, right? Like,
Right.
they're total opposites. But we just sort of accept the phrase guilty pleasures as, on some subconscious level, I think we do it because we like things to sort of feel a little dangerous or forbidden or like wrong, because it makes things hotter. I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know.
let me ask you this, because I agree. But like our personalities are pretty similar in that if it's forbidden, I love when you said it's forbidden, but not bad.
Yeah.
But that's our personality, is like, just because
Right.
something's forbidden, doesn't mean it's bad. But some personalities, the more rule follower personalities, would be like, not as excited about that as us. I think they'd be like, no, forbidden, so terrible. Like, don't do it. So let me ask you this. Is there anything in your life that you would describe as a guilty pleasure for yourself? Would you ever use those words to describe anything?
Well, I think like masturbating, I would maybe put in that category simply because it doesn't really go in any other category. But I mean that in a good way, though.
Right, like for lack of filing it anywhere else, not because it goes there.
I just put that in the pleasure category.
Well, definitely. No, definitely. But masturbation is kind of something we tend to do in private, I guess. It's not something not all people want to share masturbation with other people. I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about like why, the reasons behind this, and why there's some kind of assigned shame or something to it. And I know there's lots of varying views out there and stuff, but I love orgasming. It's kind of amazing. Our bodies are sort of incredible. And I personally think that if we want to orgasm all day long as it's not interfering with our responsibilities, I mean, let's do it, you know? But if you're doing something pleasurable in a room with a locked door and like a blanket or something over you, you know, there's a little bit of like a guilt, not guilt per se, but there's a little bit of like a hiding. Shame. Yeah, like a shame, like a secret. And all of these things, again, to me, go in the sexy category, because I have a very different relationship with like guilt and shame and forbidden stuff than I did just a few years ago. I'm a lot more embracing of all aspects of it because I because I like pleasure and I love freedom. And really true pleasure is just the freedom to enjoy. And it's crazy that we are constantly trying to put like these restraints on enjoyment of things that are perfectly natural. So I'd put masturbation in the guilty pleasures category, but only technically. As far as like a habit or like a secret, I do know what mine. You guys, I really, really, really love like when I have the house to myself, like when Brett and the kids are gone, I really like to turn on the TV and turn all the lights off and put on an episode of Vampire Diaries and I love to drink red wine and watch vampires and immortal beings on teenage television have drama that never gets resolved. It is like crack to me. I love that. I love it. But I have to time it perfectly because usually Britt and the kids are only gone for like an hour at a time. So I get like exactly one episode, you know, and
totally.
But it's amazing. It is. Totally. It's like a drug. Is that what you meant? Did I do right?
No, yeah, I think your reaction, especially the look on your face and the tone in your voice and where that went, was exactly what we meant to describe a guilty pleasure. Oh, absolutely. I do want to know if you feel the same way when you hear the words guilty pleasures. What kind of feeling do you get? What comes to mind automatically for you? Like without thinking about it first?
Yeah. So for me, actually, the term guilty pleasure doesn't really stimulate anything sexy in my mind per se. When I first learned the term guilty pleasure, it was in reference to really bad reality television. And so for me, that term is, more in that direction. So like what you were saying, like watching your show with a glass of red wine and like no one else is around. It's more in that realm. Like for me personally, like my own guilty pleasure, I'm like looking like left and right to like make sure no one else can hear me.
Like, did I leave it in here? Is it laying around anywhere? What is it?
So because this is, but it's getting a chocolate donut at Dunkin' Donuts.
Oh man!
Oh my God, it is, you guys. It is. I've watched you tell me the story, and you get so lit up, but you act like you're telling me a secret. Like I can never tell anyone.
Oh my gosh, it's so naughty. Like I should not be eating donuts. Okay,
why?
Because they're just not because
they're not food.
Because it's empty calories. They're not good for you. There's a slew of reasons why. But they taste so good and it's so fun and it feels so good.
Okay.
That's pleasure.
Interesting distinction though, because what I'm listening to is that Amanda's guilty pleasure. Because when you're like, oh, I don't want anyone to know. Actually, what it sounded like is Amanda wants to hide it from herself. Like she would judge herself, not somebody else would judge her. You know what I mean? Because that's what we're worried about, right? When we don't want anyone to know. But Chelsea seems perfectly at peace with herself and her choice. She just doesn't want other people to know and judge her. So is that a thing where we have to make a distinction with these? Like some of them we're going to be hard on ourselves, and some of them we're worried that other people are going to be hard on us?
Yeah, because it's judgment one way or another. There's really no getting around it, especially if you tack the word guilty onto a phrase. So yeah, that's a really good point though, because there's no escape really. Which do you think is like harder?
Probably ourselves, because we can't escape ourselves. Like your family might not know that that's what you're doing, but you know that's what you're doing. You know what I mean?
That's true.
I know I'm eating
Amanda
a chocolate
carries
donut.
that. Yeah, that's how I know it's ourselves, because Amanda is super hard on herself about that. I've watched you, like even now you're like, oh, but I shouldn't. Like who says? It's just you saying.
It's funny, like, I feel like right after this call, I'm getting in my car and I'm going to fucking Dunkin' Donuts.
Because we're talking about
I hope
it.
you
I'm
do.
doing it.
Take pictures. Send them to me. Take naked pictures. Naked donut pictures.
She's not going to document the evidence. Are you kidding?
Oh, right. That's something I would do.
I have evidence. It's in my car. Because I never clean out my car. Okay, that makes it sound like my car's really
There's like
messy.
what?
It's not.
Donut wrappers?
There's like 20 pounds of donut trash in there.
There is a crumpled up Dunkin' Donuts bag in one of my one of my drink holders. I have like 11 drink holders in my car. Like, I don't know why my car came with so many, but
are they all filled with donut wrappers?
Because you're American.
Nope, just one or two of them.
So do you keep that in your car to remind you of your sin? Is that what's happening there?
Well, I think it's crumpled, labeled down, just in case.
No, there's shame even in the crumpling, is what you're saying.
Labeled down. I mean, I guess if I felt really, really bad about it, I would have gotten rid of the evidence.
It's like a trophy of war, a little bit.
I know.
It's like, I crushed that donut. Then I
like
crushed the bag.
Okay, my body doesn't like pastries, but I do. So we're in a fight.
Oh, my body loves pastries. It loves them so much it hangs on to them for years.
I know, mine too, which is exactly why.
That's the problem?
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Why do we let society or whatever, our rules for ourselves, dictate how we feel about this stuff? Why can't we just enjoy it?
I would say probably because there are cultural and social consequences, or at least we as a culture and society try to make sure that there are social consequences. Because like think about how hypocritical we are just as human beings, right? Like we will like judge somebody else like crazy, like we'll just judge them for the tiniest little things, but we'll go do those same things and justify it somehow in our head. But there's like this cultural conditioning of like making sure, like, everybody make sure that you cast shame on people who are doing things that, that we don't consider fully appropriate, so that everybody behaves out in public and is just like, you know, a really weird monster behind closed doors. Like, it's,
Yes.
it's a really unhealthy thing that we do, because we basically train one another to act, to be fake, and to not allow ourselves to feel what is natural or feel what is healthy without also feeling something horrible, pathetic, or guilty at the same time. And that is just not how pleasure is supposed to work.
So I think in addition to that, it's about us living in line with our own personal values. Like for me with the donut, I feel like, okay, I'm a person who takes care of my body and eats really healthy foods. And that's my personal value. So when I'm doing something that is opposite of that, then there's guilt attached to that because I shouldn't be doing it. But here's what's interesting is what you were talking about, Chelsea, is we also have a lot of values that we get from our society that we never question, that we just take and we say, okay, this is right. This is wrong. We should be doing this. We shouldn't be doing this. And that's that, without really questioning it. So Chelsea said something, I think last week, about sex work should be legal.
Yeah.
And because I had listened to a podcast that was saying the same thing. And it never even occurred to me, you know, because I'm always thinking to myself, you know, wow, like I bet, you know, all these people who are doing quote sex work are just doing it because they have to, right? Like, but that's not actually the case at all. That's a misjudgment on my part, right? So like, because we had that dialogue, I was able to say, you know, is that really true? You know, is that really, you know, the standard, or should that really be the standard for our society? Should that really be our perspective? You know, should someone feel guilty, quote, guilty for doing sex work because it's illegal, right? So anyway, so that's kind of what you guys made me think of when you're saying that, like how we have all these judgments from our society that aren't necessarily ours because we never really decided to question them.
Totally. And how our personal set of values and beliefs that we've adopted put us into a certain grouping in society. And then there's that set of, like you said, you know, expectation, or I think we're going so far as to call it almost like a social manipulation. We have these parameters for behavior, and your parameters are dependent on which category of society you've identified with based on your, you know, religious beliefs or who, you know, lots of different things, your socioeconomic background and all of that. And so then your like sort of expectations are going to be based on that group's, even something as simple as their outlook on right and wrong, right? Their definition of right and wrong. And so, because like what you're saying, Amanda, is like a sex worker probably doesn't put anything involving sex into a guilty pleasure category. That's like a really, really dramatic example.
In a guilty pleasure category.
I'll break this down right now.
It's a dramatic example, but like another example is like my 16-year-old daughter doesn't put Vampire Diaries as a guilty pleasure into that category.
So
you know,
jealous.
so like depending on, right?
Yeah, because she's not a woman in her 30s. That's why. Way to go.
So different categories, different social expectation, therefore different definition of what constitutes a guilty pleasure. All of that changes then, I think, depending on. Because I'm like Chelsea, a few years ago, I would have put a lot more things into that category than I do now. There's very little I will put into that category, mostly because the rebel in me will not let anyone put anything into a category that is labeled to make them feel bad. I feel really strongly about that. Yeah. You know, as long as you're not hurting yourself or someone else, and breaking the law, but breaking the law is a gray area for me too.
It's not even gray for me. It's like a rainbow.
Right, it's totally a rainbow. It's totally a rainbow.
Well, but I'm raising and peace.
I'm raising teenagers, so it's like it's sometimes right. So sometimes I'm like, well, you know, we agree with this, but we also need to respect the law. That sentence is said quite a bit in my house.
It's important to say, though.
Yeah. So anyway, total tangent, but I do think that wherever you've decided to put yourself in like society's category does dictate your definition of guilty pleasure or just in general things you might do but feel a little bit weird or shameful or bad about. because a few years ago, I would have put a lot more things into that category. And the older I get, the more experiences I've had. But also I went through this period of like re-examining all of my beliefs and my values. And then one by one, really consciously deciding whether I was going to keep them or discard them for something else. And I do think that has opened me up into being more conscious about this, and also being more conscious about how I'm going to let my behavior make me feel, you know?
Well, and liberating yourself too. I mean, what you just described in 3 sentences is actually probably some of the hardest inner work that human beings ever do, if ever they even try to do it, because turning yourself inside out and looking at and looking at what you're made of and what you want to be made of and what doesn't belong it's not comfortable. It's not comfortable because of what we're talking about. There's so much to undo a lot of times, right? Or to shift or change.
But depending on where you've decided to fit yourself in with society's different categories and groupings, like I was just in a place where everything that brought me pleasure was against the rules or frowned upon. So guilty pleasure was like an oxymoron. It was the same thing. Yeah. It was like, I love how earlier you had said, you were talking about freedom, how it's a freedom. And it's true, because I think I was just in a place where it was the opposite of that. It felt like oppression. If I was a prisoner to, if I'm going to do this, then I have to feel bad about it. Or if I'm going to do this, then I have to hide it. Or like you said, go into a room with a locked door with a blanket over your head. And living that way is just, it's not living.
Really living. It's enacting, and it is surviving, and it is going with the flow. But living, or for me at least, living needs to include thriving. And you can't thrive in chains, you know? And can I ask you guys a question though? Do you guys think that if we had 3 men sitting here with us, do you think men feel the same way about quote unquote the guilty pleasure, like their definition? They can't, right?
Only if one of them likes watching the Vampire Diaries. Well, then yes, then they would say it's guilty pleasure.
I would say though that a lot of guys' only guilty pleasures would be something like that though. Like,
totally. They'd probably have a really hard time coming up with a guilty pleasure, only because they
Desperate
don't put things in that category. Not like you were saying earlier, nothing really goes in that category.
It's not
they don't have to feel bad about anything.
Their pleasure is what the entire world runs for. It doesn't. The world really runs for the hope and peace of the future. But the way that the Western world the way the entire world functions is men at the top in all matters of the word. And then, and then please them and let them get away with whatever and feel however, let them be free birds and fly around. And then they can just cast all their shame, doubt, blame, and hatred and anger on the women who are doing absolutely nothing wrong, but were being burned at the stake, which is like a whole other component to the guilty pleasure thing, because throughout history, the consequences for women daring to take their own sexual power back have literally been death, horrendous death. And then in modern times, it's not much better. You know, we've got the way prostitutes are portrayed, the way that, you know, we tend to tell the prostitute trope story and stuff. And just the way everything's presented in the media. Slut shaming is still a thing. The Me Too movement, like there's just, we can't get away with it.
Just the fact that this phrase exists that we're talking about, guilty pleasures, like we can't stand to have the word pleasure by itself. We can't let that stand on its own. Can it just be pleasure? Let a fucking donut be a pleasure. It doesn't have to be guilty.
Start with the chocolate ones. Yes.
Oh my God, so good.
It doesn't have to be guilty. It
doesn't. And why? Why did we do that to each other? And I know I totally 100% agree with you about the patriarchy and all of that, but we do this to ourselves.
Right.
Too.
We perpetuate it.
It is a conscious choice, meaning it might not have felt like it until now, and it seems so innocent that you would categorize watching a TV show as a guilty pleasure. That sounds so innocent and fun and funny and light and whatever. But to me, it's just like, it's a slippery slope, but also it's just something that if it feels light and innocent, maybe you just need to examine it deeper. Be sure that that's all it feels like to you. Because for me, 5 or 10 years ago, 10 for sure, I would have given you a long list of things that go into that category. Masturbation, sex, wanting to have sex,
Yeah.
especially because I wasn't married. Anything that I would have labeled as for me would have been a guilty pleasure. Getting my hair done would have been a guilty pleasure. Getting my hair cut, taking myself shopping would have been, lunch with the girlfriends would have been a guilty pleasure. Taking a
Yeah.
walk in the middle of the day
Oh my
instead of
gosh,
cleaning my
yeah.
house would have been a guilty pleasure. I mean,
Those are perpetuated guilty pleasures.
right. And so at some
Yeah.
point when you're just like, oh, it's a guilty pleasure, haha. But at some point you start listing them or you start thinking deeper into what does that really mean? What am I really internalizing about choosing these behaviors or the idea of even choosing these behaviors? And it was just, it's scary to me how easily that phrase rolls off the tongue as this cliche phrase, but how it's really indicative of something just way darker of this story we're telling ourselves that, like, yes, we are now allowing ourselves these behaviors. We're allowing ourselves enjoying sex or masturbation or even having a donut. We're allowing it only if we feel bad about it afterwards. That's like our penance for finally allowing ourselves this freedom. Like, what the fuck is that about?
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
There's
I
just
told
so
you guys
much.
I was going to rant.
I
told
love
you.
it though. You know what? Women guilting other women about guilty pleasures. You guys are right. That is women. We are the biggest villains because we keep that train going, and it's for the exact same reason that we tend to not get along with one another. Generally speaking, we tend to not have friendship groups that are larger than 3 or 4 at a time. While men can have a friend group of 30 people they've known since they were 4 years old. And it's just it's great, but women can't do it because we are highly competitive with one another because anthropologically speaking, our survival has depended on our ability to get a really good, strong, protective, providing male throughout history. And so we learned a long time ago that we have to keep all other females at bay so that we can go get what we want. And I know that that's not how it works in practice in modern times right now, at least, not for like a lot of the progressive world, but those patterns of behavior, they're built into like our instincts and our DNA system. And so when we see an opportunity to slap a scarlet letter on some other woman and not let her get away with whatever little guilty pleasure she might have, like sometimes we just take it, which is so crappy of us to do because we're almost threatened by the idea that another woman would actually just feel pleasure that's not guilty, probably because we sometimes feel like we don't have that option.
Yeah.
But we're all the same. It's sad, you guys. It's sad.
It is sad.
And not only would we or do we or have we been willing to put the scarlet letter on someone, but I am really fucking serious about this right now. The solution is that we actively start taking it off.
Should we take our clothes off right now?
Yeah, we would.
I'll do it.
We don't just stop perpetuating the whole judging or guilt, dictating you need to feel bad about this. We not only need to stop doing that, we need to start doing something else. We need to start reclaiming our pleasure, embracing who we are, our freedom, our no apologies. These are the things that I like. These are the behaviors that I enjoy. These are the shows I like to watch. These are the foods I like to eat. And that doesn't cancel out. It doesn't cancel out like we were saying, sometimes we feel bad because Amanda was saying maybe we're choosing something that we feel is out of alignment with our values, but like that choice doesn't cancel all those values. That choice doesn't erase who we think we are trying to be in the world.
Right.
It doesn't contradict those things. It's not something we have to apologize for. We really need to start actively choosing to feel that way about it,
Well, also encouraging other people in our circles to do that same thing. I mean, that's really why we started this podcast, was for permission, right? Permission to be empowered by who you are in this moment, for better or for worse. Because for some reason in our society, we have this standard of perfection, which, by the way, doesn't exist. And yet we continue to, to hold people to that standard. So if we just cut that back and, like you said, re-examine our beliefs, our judgments, our values, and allow ourselves to enjoy our life, which I'm sure is why we're here, and let other people enjoy their lives too.
The enjoyment of life, this is not just a frivolous recreational thing we're talking about here. Like,
right.
How in the world are you supposed to ever know who you really are? Or ever get to know yourself if you are not allowed to experience certain things about this human existence. And pleasure is not just some like trivial like background thing. Pleasure is the reason that life is created. Like that pleasure happens and then there's a baby. Do you know what I mean? Like if we put all these cages and chains and shackles on people, and then we're like, okay, figure out who you are, be perfect about it, but make sure you don't experience this entire list of items that are forbidden from you. It's just really counterproductive. And it doesn't actually benefit us as a whole, as a conglomerate of humans. It doesn't, because peace and joy and cooperation and all those good things, they're born out of a place of freedom. They're born out of a place that exists without threat or fear or unnecessary guilt and insecurity. And we got to release it, we got to get liberated if we want to get healthier, if we want to get happier, if we want to get smarter, deeper, if we want to get to know ourselves even more than we know we're able to know ourselves, if that makes sense. All of that only happens if there's freedom, if there's wings, if there's open sky. And like what we're talking about here with this word guilty being attached to the most beautiful and profound kind of thing that has a word pleasure assigned to it it's the opposite of all of that, It's dangerous.
It's dangerous. I totally agree with you because it seems so innocent. And then like we've just been talking about, when you dig into it, it's definitely not. Listen, I'm fighting. I'm fighting for everybody who feels like they have to label something as guilt or shame along with the word pleasure. I will fight for you because I get real riled up about this. So while it sounds innocent enough, I really want to just describe these things as just pleasure, full stop. No pre-qualification, no, maybe don't tell anyone, maybe don't share that with people. I just want people to own whatever it is they're doing that makes them happy. Or if you can't own it, if you really can't own it, that's a sign that there needs to be some real self-evaluation of not just that behavior, but what category have you stepped into? What category of people or rules or societal expectations? Yeah. What is feeding that shame, really? Yeah. And I love Brene Brown.
Oh, she's amazing.
All her work about shame, because that's just such a loaded topic too. So good. Yeah.
She handled it so well.
And so she talks about how the opposite of shame, and I'm really paraphrasing here, but basically the opposite of shame is to be willing to be vulnerable. And I do think that that's the other piece of turning this around for ourselves and each other as women, as a society in general, is to be willing to be vulnerable with each other. And so that's what we've just done here with you guys. Amanda was vulnerable and told you that her secret, let's call it a secret pleasure. We could say secret pleasure instead of
it's my personal pleasure.
Personal pleasure.
Yes. It's my private pleasure.
Now we're just sounding
that
real dirty.
That sounds like masturbation, private pleasure.
Real dirty. Well, isn't that also a private pleasure though?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure that's all of ours also.
My one-on-one relationship with food is so hot, you guys. Like, I love it. The way that we are able to enjoy and savor and devour an incredibly delicious meal, especially in this country, the way that we're able to do that, that's how we should be able and free to enjoy and savor and devour these other pleasures in life, safe pleasures that don't harm others, right? Like,
yes.
Like we're so good at it. We have lots of experience with food. We're really good at it. We make noises sometimes when we eat, and like it's like basically sex.
Sure.
I do. You guys have seen me do it too.
I like your food noises.
Oh my God, food is so good. Yeah, because our bodies are built for pleasure, right? So why do we have all these pleasure receptors,
right,
if we're not supposed to use them? And I don't think any of us on this call are talking about like a hedonistic way of life where it's just pleasure, pleasure, and no responsibility, you know? But we are talking about if you are going to indulge in pleasure, then don't feel bad about it.
Pleasure permission.
Pleasure permission.
I love
permission.
it.
Okay, there's got to be a better
so
shift.
Good.
I know. Sorry, we'll cut that out. We don't even know how nerdy I am.
Well, I mean, we could leave it, but I don't even know how the transcription will spell it. So that's going to be fun.
I'll figure it out.
These are the big obstacles.
So what we're saying is we've gotten vulnerable with you guys today and shared our secret/personal pleasures, and we would love to hear yours. So if you're willing to share and be vulnerable and stand in your pleasure, please let us know what else we've missed throughout this conversation. We've talked about food. We've talked about sex. We've talked about television. I don't know what other categories we're missing, and we would love to hear from you guys and find out about that. And then before we wrap up, we really just want to leave everybody with one more thought. So I'm curious, Amanda, if you could leave the honeys with one more thought about guilty/secret/personal pleasures, what would it be?
I'm going to talk about guilty for a second, and guilting yourself, guilting others. And I think we should just all take this opportunity to question our judgments when we make them and see if they really do feel right to us. Like, let's look at it from another perspective and say, wow, is that really so bad? Is it really so bad if you're eating a chocolate donut when you probably, quote, shouldn't be? Is that really wrong? No, let's look at this logically. No, it's really not that wrong, which is why after this recording, I'm getting in my car. I'm going to Dunkin' Donuts. And I can't wait, because this is why. Because when I get in my car and I eat that donut, it's going to feel really, really good. And why shouldn't I have that moment? I work hard. I deserve it. And so do you.
Chelsea, what about you?
Oh man, I don't know. That was pretty good, Amanda. Like that's...
I mean, really, everyone might have turned off the show now and gone and gotten a donut. So it maybe doesn't even matter what we say.
Half of them are already there. They're in the drive-thru right now.
Just drop the mic and go get a powdered
Dunkin' Donuts is calling us right now.
But really, what you just said, Amanda, that is really the biggest, maybe primary takeaway message that this conversation actually has to it, is that everything, even if it comes from an external place, you know, our culture, our society, the way we're raised, our external influences are still our responsibility to filter. And that's just a really beautiful thing to bring up, because filtering things like that, it's not a chore at all. That's an act of freedom. That's an act of reclamation. And actually, that's step one. That is step one right there, I would say. For those of you honeys out there who are racked in a sea of guilty pleasure, or feeling like pleasure is off limits or unable to fully experience pleasure, first of all, that is heartbreaking. That is unfair. And you deserve all the things that you think you're missing. You deserve them all. You are right to feel that and want that. So if you're listening right now, I want you to feel free and feel encouraged to take a first step of taking back some of your own power internally about how you think, feel, judge, believe, react, and maybe pick one or two things that maybe don't fit anymore, maybe don't belong. And even if nobody else in the world knows that you do that, you know, even if it's not a safe place for you to talk about it or share it with anyone in your life, that is still a victory. That is a humongous victory. And it's yours, and you deserve it. And you're beautiful, and pleasure is for you, and you are made for pleasure.
Nobody gets to tell you how you feel about something. Nobody gets to decide for you what's quote unquote right or wrong enough that it gets a emotional label put on it. You guys know I love to rant and soapbox against rules. The word guilt, the word guilty triggers the rules. And nobody gets to tell me that that's how I have to feel about something that I enjoy. So if you're a rule follower, just like message me and I will like fight for you.
Take their scarlet letter right off.
Yeah. I'll write you a whole rant that you can just like practice in the mirror, you know, and we got this. And I really hope that you can learn to enjoy what you enjoy. And that sounds so weird, but we just so often don't let ourselves do that. So enjoy what you enjoy. Maybe find us on social media and hit us up in the comments and tell us what your quote unquote guilty pleasures are. And let's just put them out there, because I think the more we're able to be vulnerable, which is that opposite of shame and guilt, we can encourage others and just remind them that they have a safe space to do the same. And that's really what we tried to do for you guys here today. And so if whatever that is feels like a hard thing to say out loud, find us in our Facebook group, which is a private group. It's a closed group just for honeys, and it's a safer space to maybe share that, because you just never know that by sharing, you're giving someone else really like the personal strength to even stand up and say, oh shit, well then I'm not going to feel bad about this thing anymore. Even if I'm not ready to share what it is with other people, I'm not going to feel bad about this thing anymore, or about myself. And that's really what it's all about, is just improving how we feel about ourselves every day. Thank you guys for listening, for tuning in. I hope this made you think a little bit more about the words you're using and what they really mean to you deep down. And I hope you'll tune in for us next week as well. If you love the show, leave a review. We would appreciate that so much, and we'll see you out there. Bye, honeys.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Raw Honeys podcast. If so, please share it with a friend or post a review. Heather, Chelsea, and I would love to connect with you. Check us out on Instagram at the Raw Honeys, or join our community of honeys on Facebook. Thanks for listening. We wish you nothing but big love.